I just got this 2012 Chevy Cruze dropped off. It's here because it needs a brand new oil pan. The owner bought the car a few months ago, and when she took it into one of those quick oil change places, someone pointed out to her that the pan has some sort of a crack or something in it, and previously someone tried to seal it up. I don't know if that's like silicone or JB weld or something like that, but the owner wants to get it fixed. So I'm gonna go ahead and replace this pan. We have a OEM, GM part to put on this thing. So what I did is I pulled it into the garage because it's late. It's like 11 p.m. right now. So I want to pull it into the garage tonight, get it up on the ramps, and I'm gonna go ahead and start draining the oil and just let it completely drain into the pan overnight. We're gonna reuse the oil because it's not here for an oil change. We don't have any new oil or filter or anything like that. So I'm just gonna let it all drain into a clean pan, and that way tomorrow morning we got like 99% of the oil out of this thing, or whatever we can get out of it. So I got the drain bolt out, and that thing came out super easy. The threads on the pan aren't looking so happy, so that's another reason for changing this pan. I mean, it was still holding, but it's not great. Of course, people have been over torquing it, and the pan is just aluminum, guys, or aluminum. So it's really important to just torque them down properly. And I also went ahead and removed the 3 nuts for the exhaust manifold, or the catalytic converter, while they were hot. So you can see I got them right there on the ground. All right, oil is draining out. I went ahead and cleaned out this container as good as I can. It looked damn near like a brand new pan. And I'm just gonna let this sit here overnight and completely drain out as much as we can. And tomorrow, when everything is nice and cold, I'll jump on this job. It's now the next day. All the oil has drained out. It's not even dripping anymore. Let me go ahead and start taking this turd apart. So I put the drain bolt in for the oil pan, and as you saw yesterday, I removed the 3 nuts for the catalytic converter right here. And then there's a brace that goes across to the body. You can see it right there on the floor. You don't have to disconnect or remove the nuts for the 2 rubber hangers that hold up the exhaust. Just the 2 on the ends right here, and then 2 more on this end, and this whole thing drops down. Since the car isn't that high, I just got it sitting here on ramps. It's okay to let the exhaust hang, and it's actually just resting on the ground here. It's not too much stress on the system because the car isn't that high off of the ground. I also had to unplug the oxygen sensor. You can see it's just unplugged right there. So make sure you do that before you drop the exhaust so you don't put any type of stress on it. The next thing we have to do is remove this plastic shield right here. It's just held on with a bunch of what looks like 8mm screws. So let me go ahead and remove this thing. I got the plastic shield removed. As you can see, it was actually 1 8mm screw, and the rest of them were 7 mils. So that's weird, but it's off now. Pretty easy to take it off. The next thing I want to do is we got to remove the dipstick. So you remove this one bolt right here, and then you can just pretty much just pull the whole thing out. You may have to wiggle it back and forth and kind of shake it all around, but it will come out. So the next step is I want to go ahead and get the air box out the way. We are going to have to lift up the engine a little bit. Yeah, I've watched other people's YouTube videos, and there's a part where once the pan is completely disconnected from the engine, it's hard to get it out. There's something that's sticking into the oil pan that's bolted to the engine, making it difficult. The trick to get around it is to lift up the engine a little bit. And I've seen a few videos, and people tend to remove these 3 bolts right here, and it just doesn't make sense why you would do that, because once you remove these, the engine wants to fall down, and it just makes more sense to get the airbox out the way and remove the 2 bolts for the actual mount that goes into the chassis. Put the airbox out of the way. Hopefully I can show you guys a little bit better. So you can see how once we remove these 3 bolts, the engine's going to want to fall down, but we don't want that. We're just trying to raise it up a little bit. So it just makes more sense to remove this bolt, this one, and this one. That way the engine can only move up if you want to pull it up like we're trying to do, but there's absolutely no way for it actually to fall down because it's unable to, because the mount's here. And if you think about this, if you go ahead and remove these 3 bolts, right, because you want to lift up the engine, you can't lift it up because the mount's in the way. You still have to remove the mount. It just makes more sense to just leave this alone. What I'm going to be using is I don't have an engine hoist here in the garage, but I do have a engine like crane, and we could, you know, have some change right here and turn the giant screw, and it's gonna lift up the side of the engine. So let me go ahead and get all that set up. So here's what I was talking about. And this car has a bit of an odd shape, so it's really hard to use this tool. On this side, I just use a piece of 2x4 and got things sitting on there. We're just really lifting up the right side of the engine, or the left side if you're looking at it like this. Right now I just got tension on the chain, so it's just holding it, and I'm not actually really lifting anything at this point. It's just I just got the chains nice and tight. And once I start moving that pan, I'm going to raise this side of the engine accordingly to what I need. You don't want to stress anything. So now it's time to go underneath the car and start removing all of the oil pan bolts all the way around it. So I got all of the bolts removed off the oil pan. They're going to be these little guys right here. They're E10. Okay. So there's going to be a few bolts that you can't get to with a standard like a 3/8 E10 socket like this one, because it's just way too large and it's not going to fit inside of here. So I found that a standard 8mm socket fits these things just perfectly. Now I always recommend using the correct tool for the job, but in this case these bolts are very low torque, and these E10 bolts fit right into the 8mm perfectly. So since they're not high torque application, I think it's okay to get away with just using a standard 8mm, and that way it may save you a trip from having to go to the auto parts store to buy a very specific socket. So all of them are going to be those E10, except for these right here. You're going to have a standard bolt right there and a standard bolt right there. They're going to be a little bit larger. I think they're 15mm. See right here. So at this point, all the bolts are off. The only thing holding this oil pan on is the adhesive from the silicone. So we're gonna have to break that bond by basically prying against something to get the oil pan to come down. And I've already got my pan separating, as you can see. Did not take much prying at all. These things tend to leak so bad that it just kind of breaks that bond of silicone all by itself. So I'm just gonna go ahead and wiggle it until it comes a little bit further down, see what's going on here. And this is what I was talking about before. Let's see if I get inside of here. You see that thing sticking down out of the engine? That's what's interfering with this pan coming completely off. And this is why we have to raise the engine to clear that. So as you can see, this pan's ready to just fall off of here. I'm gonna see how much I need to raise the engine, and then we'll go from there. So I did get the pan off, as you can see. And I had to reposition my chain right here to get it around the actual engine head itself instead of just a mount. So you can see now I have the chain wrapping around this part. Before I didn't have it like that. I raised it up to the point where I got about, I don't know, maybe 3/4 of an inch right there. You see that gap? And pretty much the same thing going on down here. So yeah, maybe 1/2 an inch, 3/4 of an inch. And that was enough for me to get the pan out. But guys, that is not good enough, trust me, because just because you could get the old pan out doesn't mean anything. The important part is getting the new pan on without disturbing the new silicone. That's the important part. And right now I was trying to get the old pan back into place to see how easy it is. And that piece that's sticking out of the engine that I showed you guys before, which is going to be this large piece right here, it's in the way. Okay, and sure, I could get it on if I mess with it enough, but keep in mind this thing has to go on really smooth because of the silicone on the new oil pan. So this is unacceptable. We have to keep raising the engine until I'm able to get this old pan in and out of here without any issues at all, and it just kind of glides right into place. Trust me, because if you disturb the new silicone trying to put it on, trying to get past this thing right here, you're just gonna end up with a leak, and all of this would be for nothing. So I'm gonna go ahead and raise the engine up a little bit more. So here's where I'm at. As you can see, I raised it up just a hair, and we are, I'd say, a little bit over 1 inch, and this mount is pretty much right off of the stud. That's not how you want to get it. And the oil pan at this point, it's not perfect, but if I'm really careful, I could slide it right in there now without disturbing the silicone. We got to get all of the old silicone off of the engine block, and just trying to clean up any oil that's just kind of hanging around. Preparation is key here, guys. So let me go ahead and spend a good amount of time cleaning everything up. So first I use a blade like this to get all the big chunks of old silicone off. You can see everything right here on the ground. And then once I got the silicone out of the way, I cleaned it off with a rag. As you can see, I got right here a rag with some acetone on it. I got some acetone in this bottle. You could also use brake parts cleaner. And then I finished it up to get the surface nice and clean with this small 3M bristle brush. It's a white one, so it's safe for aluminum. And I am just about there on how I want it. Everything looks pretty good. If I could get this to focus, there we go. So the mating surface looks nice, even, clean. I'm just going to give it one final wipe down with some acetone. Make sure it's nice and dry before we move on. Now there's 4 parts that I want to go ahead and put silicone. I'm going to be using Permatex black oil resistant RTV. So we're going to put it right here, basically where 2 pieces of metal are meeting. So right there, and then obviously right here you can see that line. So we're going to put a little bit of silicone right there and some more right here. Okay, and then all the silicone is going to go, for the most part, it's going to go on the new oil pan, minus this side right here. I'm going to put a very thin layer of silicone on this side, because remember, this is the side that the pan has to swoop in under. And if this thing wipes off any of the silicone that's on the pan, we still have an extra layer of silicone already sitting right around here to kind of seal that up. I hope all of that makes sense. All right, so there we have it. Have a little bit of silicone right there, a little bit of silicone right there, and right there, and right there. Now, as you can see, I put a very thin layer all the way along the back side of this. Now these are machined surfaces, okay? Everything is very flat. There's no reason to put a ton of silicone. If you put too much, it's going to squeeze out, and you don't want it to get into the oil pickup right there. So very, very thin amount. And the same exact thing on the oil pan side, very thin amount. So of course I'm going to go ahead and wipe up these little drips of oil before I put the pan on. But let's go ahead and put the silicone on the pan side now. There we have it. Even though the oil pan is brand new, I still wiped it down with acetone all the way around before applying the silicone. And as you can see, there is no bead on here. It's just a thin layer of silicone. That's it. You don't need a giant bead. That could actually cause problems. Make sure you go all the way around, especially around the oil pickup that needs to be sealed. And yeah, let's go ahead and put this thing on the car. As you can see, I got the new pan in place, and guys, it went as good as I could hope for. That pan almost went in perfectly without any hassle. Super happy about that. And it all comes down to being able to lift up the engine how I got it set up right here. It's very critical that you do what you have to do to make sure that new pan slides in perfectly without any interruptions. So let me go ahead and show you guys how it turned out. Okay, so I currently have all of the small E10 bolts for the oil pan. They're all in place. And let me show you the amount of squeeze out I have. So if we look right where the pan meets the block, look at that silicone squeeze out. You see that? Look at that nice thin layer. If you have big giant globs of silicone squeezing out at this point, you have way too much silicone. Now if we get back here, I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in for you guys. We have a little bit more squeeze out, which is expected, because on this side we had 2 layers of silicone. We had it on the block and the oil pan, so that's expected, but still it's not a lot of squeeze out. You can see it's just slightly more than the rest of it. Now let me show you guys something. The pan install went great. I could not have hoped for anything better, but it wasn't perfect. If you look at the harmonic balancer right there, you can see that that's silicone. So when I was trying to get the pan in place, it looks like some of the silicone rubbed off onto the balancer right here. Now at this point, that would be a compromised section, and you could potentially have an oil leak right there because it took off some of the silicone, and maybe it's not sealing. But because we put a layer of silicone on the block side as well, I'm not concerned with this. I know it's going to seal 100% because we had that little bit of extra insurance of silicone on the block side in that same exact section because of something like this. And that just proves my point. So I hope all that makes sense to you guys. As you can see, I got all of the E10 bolts in place for the oil pan. They're not torqued down yet. Everything is just snug. I'm going to give the silicone a little bit of time to start to set up, and then I'll come back and torque everything down and just wrap up this entire job. But this just goes to show, guys, that it's all in the prep work when you're doing something like this. If you prep and get or just anticipate all the potential problems you could run into, it'll just make the job so much easier. I'm really happy with how this pan went in. I could not have asked for a better outcome on how smooth it fell into place. All right, so I've checked all the bolts on the oil pan, gave them a little torque up, and I'm gonna go ahead and take lunch. And when I come back, I'll do another torque, go all the way around the oil pan, make sure everything's up to its correct torque spec. By the way, they don't get torqued down very tight. It's a very small fastener, okay? And after the final torque sequence, I'm just gonna go ahead and start putting all this stuff back together. I'll drop the engine back down where it belongs, put the dipstick back in place, the small shield, and connect the exhaust and the catalytic converter back together. So I took about a 1 hour break, and when I came back, I touched the silicone that was squeezing out on the side of the pan, and it was cured. Of course, it's not 100% cured, but it's good enough for me to go forward with. I don't like putting oil into things that the silicone hasn't cured yet, but that seemed good enough for me. So I started putting everything back together, and it's pretty much all buttoned up 100%. I even poured in the oil that we drained out of it. Now, after doing that, I cleaned off the dipstick, I reinserted it, and when I poured it out, this is exactly how it came out. So there's no oil registering on this thing. The oil level is too low. So I'm gonna go ahead and add some more oil into this thing just so it gets onto the dipstick marker, and then we'll start it up for the first time. So I just added about 2 quarts of oil. And there we have it. It's now registering on the dipstick that there's oil. So that's good enough for me. If you're wondering why I don't top it off completely, well, it probably is right at the full mark. Remember, the car is at an angle because I got it up on ramps. So once I get it down, I'll check it one more time. And if I have to add just a little bit, I will. It'll be all set. All right, so first start up. Everything sounds good. Let's go underneath the car and make sure we don't have any leaks. So everything looks good so far. I'm gonna go ahead and keep an eye on it, but that's pretty much gonna be it. The last thing I have to do is put on the little plastic shield that goes on the bottom right here. So I'm out test driving the Chevy. Now I had it running in the garage for about 15 minutes while I put away my tools and, you know, do things like check the tire pressure. And even after those 15 minutes, I looked underneath the car and the concrete was bone dry, not a single drip of anything on the ground. So that's good. But I figured we could take it out for a test drive, you know, put a little bit of miles on it, get everything nice and hot, and then we'll park it again in front of my garage and let it sit for another 20 minutes or so, half hour, and we'll check it, make sure there's nothing dripping. I'm not expecting to see anything. I'm pretty confident that this thing is fixed. But yeah, so that's gonna be it. Overall, guys, it's not too bad of a job, as long as you know what to expect and what needs to be done. There's a lot of curveballs that could catch you, like when you finally drop that pan and you're expecting to take it off and then it won't come off because there's something in your way. Now you're trying to figure out how you're gonna get this thing off. Yeah, don't deal with any of that crap. So that's gonna be it, guys, and that's it. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.